Hello, and welcome to episode 31 of the Motivational Millennial podcast. Today, we are speaking with Matthew Fredericks, who happens to be a long-term friend of Blake's. Isn't that right?
He is. He's a long-term and a long-time friend of mine. That is true.
Long-term, long-time.
Long distance. He's also long distance.
The meaning is conveyed, okay? The meaning is conveyed.
His speech patterns are beautifully elongated. He's
long-term. Oh, nice.
His hair for a while was also long. Anyway, that's okay.
Yeah, so you met him in college.
Yes, at Wake Forest.
So that's important for people to know for the context. I really enjoyed speaking with him. He is our first pastor. It was such a great conversation. His whole journey and how he got into that role and what it really means to him. Very intellectual guy, really great conversation. Stay tuned afterward for the after show, and Blake and I will share our biggest takeaways. We hope you enjoy the episode.
Let's take it to Hong Kong. Hello, welcome to the Motivational Millennial podcast, where we talk with inspiring members of the millennial generation who are living life with a sense of purpose and achieving their dreams. I'm Blake Brandis.
And I'm Ivy LeClaire.
Our motivational millennial guest today is Matthew Fredericks. Matthew is the assistant pastor at Union Church in Hong Kong and received his Master of Divinity at Princeton Theological Seminary. After participating in Teach for America in Brooklyn, he cycled across the entire United States to raise money and awareness around human trafficking. Matthew loves Chinese vegetables, running, translating the Greek Bible, his wife Jolene, and his large adopted family in Hong Kong. Matthew, welcome to the show.
Hello. Thank you guys so much for having me on here.
Well, it is a pleasure, and we appreciate you being up and early with a significant time difference in Hong Kong from us here in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Yes. Well, thank you for staying past work hours.
Of course. For you, Matthew Fredericks, we would do many a thing. It's so true.
They're so generous.
That's true. Well, Matthew is an amazing individual, as you're about to find out more about. Matthew, we'd love to hear more about what you're up to at the moment and what you love about it.
So for over 4 years now, since September of 2012, I have been living in Hong Kong, China, and I'm the assistant pastor at the oldest church in Hong Kong, Union Church. And I love about it that my approach to life thus far has been, I'm 32 years old, so I'm a decade out of university. And generally, I see that the pattern is post-graduation, people pursue an income, a salary, a name for themselves. And though I have dreams after what I'm currently doing, I decided to invert, I think, the general pattern of first establish yourself, then give to others. And I've dedicated this first decade to service and Teach for America, and then is an activist doing anti-trafficking work during my years at Princeton Theological Seminary, and now is a servant of humanity, is a pastor. So after these years of service, I would like to return to academia and do a doctorate and do some writing and other things. But for the time being, I view myself as a servant of the community, and it is a fantastic community here in Hong Kong. So what do I love about it? It's probably the people I serve. Hong Kong is a fascinating city. It's like Manhattan and Hawaii combined. More people live above the 13th floor in Hong Kong than anywhere else in the world. It is literally a sky people. If you fly into Hong Kong, you know immediately it's different because there's over 200 islands that make up Hong Kong. And off of these islands rise the skyscrapers that define the skyline. But it's not just island and skyscraper, it's also mountains. So the topography is stunning. If any listeners haven't been to Hong Kong, please visit me. And then the people themselves are very cosmopolitan, have quite an international outlook. Hong Kong recently became the largest French expatriate community in the world. And it's growing in terms of its French, German, Italian, American, of course, because it was a British colony, long-term British community. The language of business and daily interaction is English. So of the 7 million residents in Hong Kong, many of them speak English. And my community in particular has, because it's situated near to what we call Central, which is sort of the Wall Street of Hong Kong, on Hong Kong Island, has many senior leaders in it. So this is a podcast about millennials, but is a millennial for a first posting or a first, job that is a pastor, I wanted to work in a community that tended to be more senior than me and that I could learn a great deal from. So this community that I'm in has a lot of especially senior financiers, but also leaders in every field, whether it's media or medicine or et cetera.
You've spent the past 10 years dedicating your life to service. What is important to you about being of service?
I'll approach this in perhaps best from anecdote. And when I was in high school, because my family has a military heritage, my great uncle was General Westmoreland, who commanded the U.S. forces in Vietnam. It's a mixed heritage, let's say, for the family, because we admire him as a person, even though we mourn the war itself. Mm-hmm. But both grandparents, my immediate grandparents, were involved, and one was the highest ranking officer killed in the Vietnam War, and the other was a veteran from World War II. So because of that heritage, I thought service would best be through the military service. And I went to university, to Wake Forest, where I met Blake Brandis, and began training to become an officer. And that was a wonderful first year. I enjoyed the physical challenge of the military and going out and playing in the woods and everything, but eventually realized that actually the goal of this is training me how to kill. And it simultaneously was taking 2 courses, one on the French Revolution and the empire established by Napoleon. And I read a lot on Napoleon, who, as far as military leaders go, is one of the great geniuses of history. But the more I read on him, the more I found his life repugnant. And on the other hand, I took a course on literary figure from Russia, Fyodor Dostoevsky. And Dostoevsky is probably most famous for his novel Crime and Punishment. But he also wrote a novel called The Brothers Karamazov. And this novel really changed my life because there's a main character in there, Alyosha. And Alyosha views himself as a servant of the community that he's in. And it tells his story contrasted to his brother's stories. And his brothers are more about projecting themselves, more sort of Napoleonic temperament, you might say, or at least one of them. And Alyosha is the reverse. He would rather establish others to flourish. And as I read the character of Alyosha, I saw a very Christ-like heart or temperament in him. And if listeners from other faiths, would recognize the best in their faiths in this character of Alyosha, very servant leader spirit. And I think it was the contrast between Napoleon and this figure from Russian literature that got me to reframe what it meant to be a servant. And it's not necessarily seeking one's own glory, and it is essentially putting the interest of others first. So when I reevaluated, I thought, okay, I'm going to go into education to fight the war on ignorance rather than the war on terrorism. I feel more called to that. And I think it was that reframing from those works of literature and from that juncture in my life of a first step after university, trying to decide what to do, and landing in education. And I really see pastoring or the ministry is an extension of my first interest or first love in education. My wife is a banker. She works for BNP Paribas, and her colleagues are just baffled that she married a pastor, and they can't figure out what a pastor does. And the first question is it a full-time job? Of course, on Sunday you have to stand up and say some prayers and give a homily or a sermon, but what do you do during the week? And it's not a highly compensated role. Why would anyone willingly choose that role, especially if they had a slightly above basic intelligence? So it's baffling. So it's fun for me to be in a role which is misunderstood, or a role which people don't know much about, and get to communicate that being a pastor involves, I think, many aspects of other public servants. For instance, there's a large counseling aspect in ministry. So counselors provide this wonderful service to us to listen and to help us listen to ourselves as we evaluate our traumas, our hurts. And as a pastor, whether it's in the hospital immediately after the event, or whether it's after or before a funeral in preparation for a funeral, or whether it's helping a couple through their first marriage crisis or prepare for marriage and helping them try and save their marriage before it starts. There's a large counseling role to it, which I love. There's a teaching role, and this is, we want to train the children in the church in what it means to be a person of good character. And then there's, of course, the aspect that most people see if they were to attend a church during a Sunday service, and that's the homily, the exposition from Scripture, from the Bible. So this teaching part is important. There's also an administrative function, an event organization role that you play. So there's many different roles.
Yeah. So I'd love to know, because you're speaking to the fact that being a pastor in your community, your church community, it's an incredibly important role and can be a big job. How has your identity shifted from the kind of service that you talked a little bit about, it shifting from going into military service then to as an educator? So how has it shifted into this role where essentially you're helping people make meaning of their lives? What's that been like for you?
The first time I gave a sermon, which is sort of a first attempt to advise people on how they make meaning out of their lives, was quite a nerve-wracking experience for me, because I added up the estimated income of the congregants in our church. And I think I came to, if you took their hourly compensation and the fact that I would monopolize 30 minutes of their time, and you multiply that by, the number of congregants, it would be like $1 million that I was going to be eating up.
Oh my God.
And this was just terrifying to me. And I thought, what do I have as a 27-year-old? We have a wide range from domestic helpers from the Philippines or Indonesia, generally speaking, to several of the billionaires in Hong Kong that are the leading developers in Hong Kong. So, what do I, as a 27-year-old, have to tell these women who are champions of going into a home and without any acknowledgement, basically underpinning the family, or these tycoons who have built much of the beauty that I was speaking about of Hong Kong's skyline? And I stayed up all night, thought about jumping off the balcony and all sorts of things. But I think it was really the exhilaration of knowing that, as Newton says, I stand on the shoulders of giants, and it's not my wisdom that I'm meant to represent. It's the wisdom of a heritage which is 2,000 years to Christ and a good roughly 3,500 to Moses, a good 4,000 to Abraham, etc. And this is such a rich tradition, and I'm meant to contextualize it. And who better to contextualize it than a millennial? Someone seeing with fresh eyes the tradition and the heritage. And which I think would be a great challenge to these seniors. So yes, I find this role of presenting meaning so important, because it is easy for these leaders to, I think, do two things. One is to be discouraged about their role and think that it doesn't matter. And you'd be shocked by the number of bankers in Hong Kong who come to my church who do not see themselves as producing anything meaningful, especially the millennials in banking. And they see their days as fairly worthless in comparison, they imagine, to someone who, is, let's say, doing a nonprofit work or something of that sort. And so I think one of my roles is encouragement, just reminding people that every profession is playing a very meaningful role in society. And without the banker, we don't have the bond market, for instance, that allows us to build schools and hospitals in developing countries. So as much as the nonprofit individual would like to help a country, at some point they need some macro level development projects. And for that, we need the bankers. So encouragement is one. But the other is, it's easy to just sit on one's influence and to allow one's influence to grow without purposefully using it for the good of others. And especially as I described, because we have some extraordinary leaders in the church, they're just such simple truths. It is more blessed to give than to receive, something like that. But these truths, it's essential that we hear them on a preferably daily basis, but at least on a weekly basis. So it's encouraging people to use the influence that they have, or, the hand that rocks the cradle shapes the world. So we have many helpers who, because they're stereotyped or because they're not treated decently in the homes that they serve in, are discouraged and also wonder, if they're serving any purpose. But it's true, I think, to say that perhaps more so than the parents themselves, the domestic workers from Indonesia and the Philippines are raising a generation of children in Hong Kong. And it is their philosophy and their behaviors which the children see and hear far more than their parents. So anyway, these are just some examples of how to, as a pastor, the privilege of communicating meaning to people's lives.
What a gift, too, that you're able to connect each of these individuals' journeys to the larger historical forces at work. I think it's one thing to be reminded of the importance and purpose of our own contributions to our immediate families or communities, but I love how you've scaled it up to say this is really what is making society function, and you are a representative and a participant in that process. So what a gift to give to people. And you've mentioned some incredible things that you've done along the way, from Teach for America to your anti-trafficking work, which I definitely want to hear more about in a moment, and now to your ministry in Hong Kong. And of these various dreams that you've achieved so far, what would you say feels like the biggest dream for you? And how have you had to grow to achieve that dream as a person?
Probably the biggest, when I was at Wake Forest, Blake, I had an economic history professor, and she said during a lecture that slavery still existed in the world. And I raised my hand and begged to differ. I said, slavery ended 1830s Great Britain, 1860s United States, 1940s Ethiopia, went through various countries. And I said, slavery is done. Thank goodness. And she said, "No, Matthew, you're wrong. Slavery is alive and well, and I'm assigning you a paper on sex trafficking."
Wow.
Well, it was just in that, I think this was 2006, where sex trafficking or child sex trafficking, human trafficking was just beginning to be published on and be noted, people to be made aware of it. And so I went to the library, and even though our Ronaldo library was a beautiful library, there was no books at the time on human trafficking. I think I eventually found two, but what was available was like Vanity Fair, for instance, these unlikely, or GQ, these very unlikely periodicals were beginning to write about sex trafficking. Mm. So I read through those, and as I did, my faith journey began when, as a 12-year-old, I realized my anger was out of control. And it was through reading a book from the Jewish Bible, the Old Testament, called the Book of Proverbs, and statements like, "It is a wise man controls his temper," or "a gentle answer turns away wrath," or "it is better to overlook an insult than to react immediately." These simple but profound statements that I read again and again. And it was through really appropriating that book that I was able to control my anger, and I felt started my faith journey. So for years, I'd become, or was glad that I'd become, a patient person and not an angry person, which really defined my childhood. So as I was reading these statements of these 12-year-old girls being put through the sex trafficking cycle, I felt for the first time in about 7 or 8 years my anger returning to me. Mm. And it was sort of a righteous indignation of, I cannot tolerate this happening in my world, or in our world. So I applied for a scholarship that was available, the Pro Humanitate Scholarship, to go do research. The original proposal was to go to Eastern Europe and interview the leaders of the trafficking circles, which the committee thought was a very foolish plan and would probably get myself killed. So I had to rewrite the proposal. And they told me, you need to find an organization to work with. You can't go, vigilante justice. So when Reason came in, and I found a wonderful organization in India. And it was also one which is, now that I'm a pastor, you could imagine would relate to my interest. It was an organization that would go to local churches, train and empower them to rescue children at risk of being trafficked or who had been approached by traffickers, and create safe homes for them. So this program, this organization was connected throughout Kolkata and the environs around Kolkata. And I really liked the model because it was grassroots. And so I went to work with them for a summer and was able to interview women who were a part of this program who had lived through the sex trafficking cycle. Or, on the other hand, parents who had lost a child to the sex trafficking cycle. And as I sat there and listened to a mother sitting on a terrace of a rice paddy weep about not hearing anything from her daughter, but suspecting that she'd been trafficked to Mumbai, it was those experiences that really solidified this again, kind of burning inside of me to do something on this issue. And so after this, I went to Princeton Theological Seminary, and I was reading through the prophet Amos from the Old Testament, the Jewish Bible. And the prophets are often, I think, written off by current culture is these sort of doomsday figures or religious freaks. But the foundational message of many of the prophets was actually a social justice one. And Amos is a great example. He was living in a time of tremendous prosperity in ancient Israel. And in light of this prosperity, he saw that while people enriched themselves, they did it at the expense of the poor in the community. And so he would say things like, you'll build these summer homes and these winter homes, you'll plant these vineyards, you'll build these beautiful stone palaces, but you won't drink the fruit of the vine, and you won't live in these mansions you've created because you deprive the hungry of their grain. You trample on the widow and the orphan. You take justice from the needy. And so it's this very powerful social justice voice. And it's the voice of Amos that Martin Luther King Jr. quoted in his famous I Have a Dream speech, let justice roll down like waters. So reading this book, I've had a compelling, again, sense, even though I live in a little box, a dormitory. Nevertheless, on a world standard, I'm quite wealthy because of the connections that I have, and just that I have access to running water and a great education, etc. So I was at the registrar's office at the university, at Princeton University, to begin a course. And the mailman came into the registrar's office and said, son, what I hear you're at the seminary, what do you do? People are always interested in, like, what do pastors actually do? I said, oh, well, we study this and this. And he said, is it just like Hogwarts? And I said, well... what do you mean? And he said, you're like changing water into wine, learning to walk on water. And we laughed about that. He thought it was like a school of wizardry. As we walked out of the registrar's office together, he turned to me and he said, again, son, always remember, life is not a dress rehearsal. And then he got in his little mail cart and drove off. Of course, he had a spectacular Jersey accent, which I won't try and impersonate. But you can see a quote and just walk by it. But every now and again in life, there's a quote that just seizes you. And that really seized me in how he delivered it. It was almost out of just quite a random but timely message. So I thought, yes, life is not a dress rehearsal. Why am I thinking that one day when I have, the influence of, some of these senior statesmen in the church I now, I kind of was imagining like that type level of I'll do something. But no, it's right now that I'm to begin, and right now that I have more resources than most in the world already. So that started me on several fundraisers. So I'd organize foot races where people would run, and to sign up for the race, they'd have to pledge a certain amount of money, and then that money would go towards this organization in India. And eventually I started to read about these characters who are professional adventurers, but who raise money by doing things like, walking across a desert or cycling around the world. And I thought, well, I don't know if I'll cycle around the world, but I can cycle across the United States. So I got a bicycle and I started training. I turned it into, there's a device you can get that makes a road bike into a stationary bike. And I resolved to watch all the Best Picture films, all the films that have ever received, the Best Picture accolade. And so I'd bike and I'd watch these films. I was getting a history lesson while I was training.
Nice.
That was through the winter. And then I invited about 10 friends to come on this bicycle trip with me. And the only one who accepted was a wonderful, but slightly crazy friend of mine, a banker, an amateur boxer from London, which I never expected him to want to come to the U.S. and cycle across the U.S. to raise money for human trafficking. But he was the only one who showed up in the end. We needed to choose our route. And I wanted to go the northern journey, through Montana and the big sky country and all this. But Johnny read that there were grizzly bears there. And when we called a park ranger's office, and, I wanted reassurance that of course, you're not going to get eaten by a grizzly bear if you're on a highway. And the park ranger said, well, yes, if you're in an automobile going faster than the grizzly bear can run, you will not be eaten. But if you're on a bicycle, I can't guarantee anything. And that was enough for Johnny. We decided to take the southerly route because there's a much smaller or non-existent grizzly bear population. So,
but a much hotter climate, though, right?
Yeah.
But a much hotter climate. So we ended up, when we reached Kansas, in just a dreadful heat wave. And so the temperature was like 116 degrees Fahrenheit one day.
Dang.
That's over 40 for the Celsius people. And so it was just, the southerly route had its own challenges. And I think the most overlooked but powerful aspect of the citizenship that we hold is the land itself. It's so beautiful. So few people actually see it, take time to go out into it. Anyway, so the result of the journey was raising money to build a rescue center for children who specifically were, some of them actually rescued in the trafficking process, or some of them approached by traffickers, or some of them, because they're street children and have no one to turn to, are in high danger of it. So we raised the money for it, built the center, and I think it was going to India and seeing that completed center and seeing the 100 or so children that were there and receiving an education, the male and female leaders of it, very, very balanced ratio. Just seeing the end result, I think that was the most satisfying work that I've done so far in my life.
It's so inspiring, and it sounds like you were able to create your own pilgrimage, in a sense, across the U.S., which is like a very often physical experience where you spend a lot of time alone and a lot of time with the divine as you are moving forward and hitting, city after city. I'm really excited and inspired by that story.
Thank you.
One of the aspects that Matthew did not mention is that, correct me if I'm wrong, you managed to do that basically surviving on bags of spinach and almonds? Is that... Because I just remember you mentioned you just were like eating bags of spinach. I'm like, Matthew, you're biking 100 miles a day. Like, you need calories.
That's too funny.
Yeah. I was raised a vegetarian, so I was just basically continuing that diet and realized when I weighed myself, I dropped like 125 pounds and I'm 5'10", so that was low. And realized that, yes, I'm probably consuming 6,000 calories a day. I need to eat constantly. Yeah.
So would you share a story about the most significant challenge that you have faced so far and what it was like to overcome that challenge?
First thing that pops to mind is a challenge that I haven't overcome yet. And I have within me a great desire to write. And I would like to be a more disciplined writer. The church that I'm a part of here encouraged me to do some continuing education. And I applied to a Master's of Creative Writing at the University of Hong Kong. And the University of Hong Kong is one of the best in East Asia. It's a great school. And it is the only creative writing program in Asia, which was a real shock to me. So this program that I joined basically gave me a tribe of writers. And this tribe of writers, so to speak, was a real encouragement in beginning to write and creating the deadlines and the structure necessary. I think the powerful thing about writing is that even after one is gone, your insights and reflections live on. For many reasons, I think writing, if philosophy persuades almost by logical intellectual coercion, I think literature persuades in a very seductive way by telling you a story and you're drawn into this story, and then at the end of the story, you draw the conclusion. So I would love to do more writing and use it for the benefit of others and just for the enjoyment of others. My favorite moments have been, for instance, reading Harry Potter. And I remember when my girlfriend in high school dumped me, and I was far more sad about losing Hermione finishing the end of the Harry Potter series than I was this girlfriend dumping me. These literary characters can become a part of our, like Alyosha, I said at the beginning, can become a part of our lives. And to create them is so much fun because you almost feel bound by the identity of a character in writing, if you've done a good job creating a character. So that said, I'm a beginner writer, and I think an obstacle is setting aside the busyness or the demands of my community, which it's good that I'm trying to meet, but in a sense they're endless. With 2,000 affiliated people in the church, I could spend all my time ministering to them directly and probably only touch about 200 of them effectively. So learning how to cordon that off, set that aside in order to create time for art and to create a meaning which will last beyond a conversation. So I would say my biggest challenge is one which I haven't really solved yet, but I'd like to do more writing.
As your mailman friend said, life is not a dress rehearsal, right?
Yes.
That's a good encouragement. I love especially how affected you are by literature. And I think when English professors are trying to teach their students the importance of the books they're reading, I think they really hope that someone like you is going to come out of their class and say, oh, like these characters are such great metaphors for our life and the possibilities we create for ourselves and the challenges we overcome. One of my favorite memories is you telling a story, and you'll have to correct me if this is wrong, but of your family road tripping together and listening to audiobooks and pulling into your driveway. I believe it was you just were finishing Les Miserables, and just the entire family pulling the driveway sobbing, and your neighbors coming over saying, oh my gosh, what happened on your vacation? And you all just being fraught from the end.
Yeah.
So when you look at the accomplishments that you have experienced in your journey, both personal and professional, which of them have surprised you the most?
That's a great question. It must be something to do with coming to Hong Kong, because Hong Kong was, when I told my friends in seminary that I was going to Hong Kong, the response I received from nearly everyone was, oh, konnichiwa, konnichiwa. I said, no, that's Japan. Hong Kong's in China. But frankly, I think I wasn't much ahead of them. I knew very little about Hong Kong. And all I knew about China is that the church is growing. I think it's growing the quickest in Cambodia, but China is probably not far behind it in this region. And no one's sure how many Christians there are in China, but estimates range from about 50 million to 100 million, which, given the policies of the Maoist regime, are a real surprise. So I think coming to Hong Kong and working with the church here in China is probably the biggest surprise turn in my life. And that's how I got here as a story in itself. But I think out of this has come, it's really just the individuals. And it's funny being a pastor, reflecting back on your success, because unlike my wife, who can look at a year end and she can see how many millions she's made for the company, she can see how many deals she's made. For a pastor, there aren't those hard figures, and attendance can be a very superficial thing. People have different intentions for the reason they attend church. How do you measure your value to the community as a teacher, is a counselor, is a pastor, is an event planner, is an activist. And I think it's really just to cherish those little interactions that you have, which are often surprise interactions. I think it's been sort of the joy of the interactions with unlikely or really least of these characters. I like to, when I give a sermon, try to illustrate by living what I'll be speaking on. And St. Francis said the best sermon is one without words, just actions. So I was speaking on, there's a story in Jesus' life of Jesus touching the leper. And lepers were the pariahs in the age of Jesus because people didn't understand their disease. And so they were cast out of the community. And for him to touch the leper was for a leader of a movement to establish contact with the untouchable. And it's a significant moment in Christianity. And I thought, in Hong Kong, who are the lepers? Well, Hong Kong, along with Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, and some other cities, has the highest inequality in income. So 40% of people in Hong Kong actually live below the poverty line. And many of them are homeless or live in total squalor in these subdivided flats. So I thought the homeless people are the untouchables in Hong Kong. What would it mean for me to touch the untouchable? And so I decided one night that I was going to go be homeless and live with the homeless. So I got some, long pants and a sweater and a blanket, and I went down to a park in Kowloon, and we call Kowloon the dark side here. It's infamous for the triads and other gangs, which, anyway, it's sort of notorious here. So went to Kowloon to a park, and then to Sham Shui Po, a very poor area, and found the homeless group in the park and laid down next to them, and quickly realized that you need more than a blanket to be comfortable on a concrete park bench or concrete floor. And one of the homeless men nearby woke up, saw that I was tossing and turning and uncomfortable, and he got up, walked away, came back with a mattress, and he gave it to me. And I slept on this mattress all night and was able to sleep because of it. And then in the morning, he didn't ask questions about why I was there, but just assumed that maybe I'd fallen on hard times as well. And so in the morning, he showed me where to go to get a free shower and where to go to find a cup of noodles and to find a Catholic charity was handing out oranges. And so basically just taught me how to survive as a homeless person. And here I went to this homeless community thinking I would touch them, but instead was touched by them.
Wow.
And him in particular. So I would say the biggest surprise in my life has been coming to Hong Kong. And the second biggest surprise was that despite, of course, everyone's biased and thinks their alma mater is the greatest, but coming from, I think, the greatest theological institution in the States, or one of, I thought, I have so much to share. But realizing that in the end, I've received so much more from this community than I've shared with them.
Wow, thank you for sharing that incredible story and perspective.
Thank you, Ivy.
What advice would you like to give to other millennials who are on a journey toward fulfillment and success?
Last night, I heard someone share this, and I really like it. So there's Psalm 23 is the famous, "The Lord is my shepherd" psalm, very short psalm. And towards the end, it says, "My cup overfloweth." And I think often we lack joy in our lives as millennials because we look to our parents, or we look to Mark Zuckerberg, or, to other great people, and we think, wow, my cup is 95% empty. A friend of mine last night at a study circle, Johann shared is an accounting professor. He always gives a final lecture, and the final lecture is, how do you make a cup overflow? You make it overflow by reducing the size of the cup. And so stop worrying about the 95% that you don't have. It's very easy to spend your life planning and forget the present, or to live in the present. But to step into the present, to seize it with joy, and to appreciate, whatever percentage you do have now. And in so doing, it's not that you cast out ambition, but you take your cup to a level through contentment that allows it to overflow. And I thought that was a really beautiful image, and one which I'd like to make my cup overflow more. And I can do that through having a smaller cup, through contentment.
Well, you certainly make a lot of other people's cups very full, so we appreciate all that you do and share. Matthew, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. Would you be able to tell our audience where they can find out more about your work?
If they go to the Union Church website, Union Church Hong Kong, all my contact information is there. So just Google Union Church Hong Kong, and then under Matthew Fredericks, I have a little profile, and email and phone number should be there. So
excellent. Well, you have invited everyone to come visit you in Hong Kong, so I think we'll have to have a motivational millennial retreat.
That'd be so amazing.
Coming out and hanging out with you.
Yes.
No, this has been great, man, and just really appreciate the opportunity to hear your story, and we appreciate all that you do for so many people.
Blake, thank you so much, and thanks so much for your friendship over the years.
The Motivational Millennial podcast is supported by Motivational Millennial Coaching Services. We help you find clarity and confidence so you can take action toward living your dream life. To learn more about one-on-one personalized support from someone who believes you have a path to fulfillment and wants to help you uncover it, visit motivationalmillennial.com/coaching. Welcome to the after show of our conversation with Matthew Fredericks, all the way from Hong Kong.
Whoop, whoop.
Appreciate him getting up nice and early with a 8-hour time difference, 9-hour time difference, a lot of time difference.
Yeah, it's like 16 hours or something.
That's right. It's a different day for him.
It's 16, yeah, because it was 5 o'clock our time and like 9 o'clock his time in the morning. 5 o'clock p.m. here and 9 a.m.
That's right.
The next day. Yeah. He's in the future.
He's in the future.
That's what I always think.
Wow. That's right. That wasn't what we had planned to talk about in the after show, but it is an interesting revelation nevertheless. We are here in one day and someone else is in another day. It just goes to show it's all arbitrary and socially constructed anyway.
I know.
So, speaking of social construction, I wanted to talk about literature. No, I wanted to follow up on the point that I briefly made in the show, but I really love how much Matt has drawn inspiration and purpose and creativity from literature, both in the literary sense and also in the biblical sense, as he is a scholar as well. And
you mean biblical sense, like literally, not like not like in the quote unquote.
He knew her in the right biblical sense. No, that is right. I meant the literal biblical sense. That's true. I mean it literal Leviticus style. Anyway, so all let's say, I really appreciate the idea that literature can help us understand more about who we are and who we want to be, because if you think about it, they are actually stories creating people that then we make real by our reading of them, by our interpretation, talking about them, responding to characters, creating additional plays and movies. So I like this idea of the fictionalized self, and the idea that all ourselves are really fiction in a certain way.
Yeah.
I say it more positively, perhaps, when we're talking with students, and that we say the story you tell yourself about who you are and what you're capable of can change your life.
Yeah, you don't come in and say, it's all a lie.
That's right. I'm going to talk to you about your fictional self today.
Everything is socially constructed.
That's right. Everything you think you know and care about.
It's all a story.
That's right. It's all a story. Nothing is real. You will die the way you were born, alone.
But it's so true. And I think when you think of it from an empowering lens, I mean, and that's really what you do end up talking to them about, is that you have a choice as to which story you're going to ascribe to yourself and to others. And so we could pan out to the meta view. We could look at the fact that we have stories about who we are, about who our friends are, about who our partner is. Like, we have these stories, and we could look at the fact that those exist and the fact that those really are constructs in our mind and be really freaked out and upset and like mad. Or we could say, wow, this is actually really empowering, because what I think about myself and what I'm capable of can change. Mm-hmm. And what I think about others and what others are capable of can also change.
Yeah, there's a lot of research around how students especially live up to the expectations you set on them. So there are all these sociological studies where, right? Yeah, it's true. Where, the teacher is told this is a class of brilliant kids, and so the teacher teaches that way, and the kids live up to that expectation. Or the teacher is told this is a class of underperforming kids, and the students' performance, even when they were medium to high performing students beforehand, the performance goes down because of the way they're treated. They start to internalize that story. And you're right, we are all telling stories, and that is a good thing and a bad thing. I mean, on one hand, it's challenging because we never can truly know who someone is, but we also don't know who we are all the time either.
Seriously.
So
That's part of the mystery.
Yeah, which, as you're saying, lets you create a new story and agree with someone to create a new story. In my mind, one of the most fascinating examples of this that most of our lives depend on is the story we tell ourselves about money and what it means. So if you think about it, it's just paper. Or in most cases now, it's just numbers in a computer somewhere. Like, money doesn't do anything on its own. Like, you can't build a house out of money. I mean, I guess you could out of $1 bills and coins or something, but it would be very expensive and inefficient and would probably, get soggy. Anyway, unless you live in the Bay Area where it rains 1 month out of the year. Anyway, total digression. But the point is, with the financial system, it's all a story. So you believe this $20 bill has value. I believe it has value. And so you'll give me a book for it, or 2 CDs, or
so trippy, though.
5 cups of coffee, And if you didn't agree to that, and if enough people didn't agree that that was true, our financial system would collapse.
But I also think it allows us to reframe our relationship with money, in that when I'm feeling my most aligned and spiritual and I'm thinking about money, I'm thinking of it as an exchange of energy. Because for people who are solopreneurs or entrepreneurs and they're just starting, it can be really difficult to value yourself very highly. So you might provide a service for like $10 an hour or something because you feel shame and guilt around the money aspect of it, because there's a ton of emotional baggage in our culture around money. And so when we reframe it and look at it as an exchange of energy, meaning, I am providing value to you to help you accomplish your goals or what you want out of life. And then you are compensating me in a way that allows me to continue creating what I want out of my life too, right? So that's the ability for us to change the story we have around money as well.
Yeah, and I thought Matthew's story about spending the night with the homeless community was really a great example of that, how he was going in there sort of as an experiment, and someone gave him the gift of a mattress because they saw he was uncomfortable. And so in that moment, there was this exchange of energy. There was this humanity in saying, I care about this other person, and therefore I'm going to share what I have with them. And so it's a really important point because some people have more money or less money, but that doesn't mean they have more or less to give.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that sometimes is a story we can tell ourselves. And I've been guilty of that, certainly in the past. I know, oh, I only have X amount of money in my bank account, therefore I need to be super frugal with it and not give in this instance, even though I feel called to do that. But that's just not how it works. I mean, that's the abundance mindset, is that there are ways we can contribute that are small but meaningful, and they don't always have to include money. Money is a shorthand we have for value and energy exchange.
Yeah, and I'm laughing when you say abundance mindset, because it's exactly what I was thinking about when you started talking is, the abundance mindset really being that there is enough out there. There is enough love. There is enough money. The contrast is the scarcity mindset. And that's something that we're particularly familiar with in this culture. Because, for example, if we see someone who is famous and successful, there's a part of us that believes that fame and success are limited. And so if that person has that thing, I therefore cannot have that thing. As if success is like a pie and it's a limited thing. And if a person takes a portion of that pie, they decrease the chances that I can also be successful. Mm-hmm. When in reality, there is no limitation in regard to what is possible for us.
Yeah, if you're seeing a limitation, often it's because your frame is too small. So to your example, you could argue that movie stars actually do have a limited number of roles in movies. But that's coming at it from the idea that there can be no more roles created ever, that the current amount of roles is a fixed amount of roles available for them. But you could expand the frame and say, well, what if that movie star went and created a movie in which they played the role, or they were the producer, or they teamed up and created something new. So to your point, the scarcity mindset is what we call a limiting belief because it places artificial limits around what is available for the human mind to create. And I think that's the thing. It's like, if you look at what is currently in the world, think this is all there will ever be, then you may be right. There may be a limited number of options in any given field or area. But if you look at the world and say, okay, here's what currently is, what can I add? What can I bring? What can I contribute to this? Then it expands massively, and there are people you can collaborate with to amplify your effort. And Matthew Fredericks has done a great job through his community and the work he's doing to amplify his influence and his reach. Because if you think about those bankers that he's describing in his community and the domestic workers that he's describing, the impact he has on their lives and their mind states and their actions in the world amplifies who knows how big, either through the financial sector, either through family life, all these different avenues. And so he is creating every single time he's speaking, he's counseling, he's working with the community.
But if he had gone into that role and thought, this leader in the church has been here way longer than me, I'm never going to be able to be as successful as that person in doing this, he would be limiting himself in that instance. And that's where gratitude can be such a helpful framing. I mean, gratitude comes up a lot in our discussions because it's invaluable. And sometimes in our interactions, when we have a close friend that gets a new car and it's like the new car that we've always wanted and we don't have that car, we can approach that in a couple of ways. One is, the person comes and they're like, "Hey man, do you want to come drive my car? Do you want to give it a spin?" And you're thinking, "No, whatever, whatever, just get out of my face. I don't need that." Because there's a part of you that's thinking that because he has that car, that you're never going to have it. It's weird. It's like you're viewing somebody else's abundance as somehow a referendum on your own abundance or perceived lack thereof. Mm-hmm. But in that moment, if you were to look at it from a gratitude perspective, one, you're like, "Oh my goodness, I'm so happy for you that you got this car. That is so freaking cool." And you're like, "And holy crap, you're going to let me drive it right now? Like, that's so amazing. I can't believe that I have this opportunity." And then your life is filled with more abundance in that moment because you were coming from the perspective of gratitude and not a perspective of scarcity. And that really actually leads into the point that I thought was really interesting and wanted to talk about, which was when he was speaking of your cup overfloweth, and the perspective that to make your cup overfloweth, focusing on reducing the cup. So what I'm hearing that to mean is that if your expectations of what you should have in your life externally are incredibly high, then you're always going to feel like your cup is empty. But if you lower your expectations, or I would say, and reframe it to say, if you practice gratitude for what you already have, you are decreasing your cup, and your cup is going to overflow.
Yeah, it's that idea that if you can just be grateful for waking up in the morning, it's already a victory. And I think an example that resonates from my own life is when I moved to Ireland. I was 9 years old, and we didn't have all the things I had been used to growing up in suburban America. So we didn't have a car or a television or a washing machine or a dishwasher or a dryer, for that matter. You know, we had a hand-push lawnmower that was manual blades, like it didn't have an engine.
Nice.
And I walked to school, we carried our groceries. And I just remember thinking, you can be happy without all those things. And that made me realize that so many of these appliances that I thought were necessary were actually luxuries. And that got reinforced when I spent some time in Morocco, living with a family in the city of Fez, where they had a modest apartment in the Ville Nouvelle, which is sort of the outer ring of the city. And they were happy. They didn't need or want a lot beyond the health and happiness of their family. And that's such a great reminder that if you can truly focus on what is at the core every day, you can start off the day with the most success you can imagine. And anything else on top of that is a bonus.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that we're not saying you should be grateful for what you have, because that can be kind of a shaming perspective. Like,
true. You
shouldn't want more, like, you should just be grateful for what you have, and that can keep us from pursuing our dreams. Mm-hmm. That can keep us from pursuing our passion. So what we're saying is that being grateful for what you have now, it's going to aid you in your path toward your dreams. It's going to aid you in creating the life that you want, in improving your relationships and improving your health, because you are in the habit of looking at what is good around you and looking at what opportunities you have. Because if you practice gratitude, you're going to see more opportunities to create and do what you want. Versus if you're in a mind state all the time of feeling like there isn't enough, or like you're not enough, or that everything sucks and is horrible, it makes it a lot more difficult to move forward and to take leaps and to achieve what you're wanting to achieve. So it's so interesting, because in being grateful for what you have, you are actually more likely to fill your cup up even more. Like that, mm-hmm. Being grateful for what you have gives you the opportunity to get so much that you have to get a bigger cup then, and it's like...
Well, that's an important point too, because you're right. I'm certainly guilty of shaming myself for my privilege or certain privileges that I have, or that I perceive that I have. And part of it comes from why am I not happy right now? I have so much compared to so many other people. And it's really the comparison mind that I'm using to beat myself up. And it's so unnecessary. You can be grateful without feeling guilty. Mm-hmm. And you can celebrate what is without it being a reflection on wanting to deny other people what you have or what you want for them and what you want for yourself.
Yeah, and you can celebrate what is without it meaning that you'd never want anything else.
Right.
Again, like, okay, I'm so grateful for everything I have, and now I'm done.
That's right.
The end.
Yeah, life is a continuous journey of growth, and what you want and are interested in can change. And so the things that you are grateful to have in your life, I think you can also be grateful to let go for various reasons.
Yeah.
Whether that's, possessions or a job or a friendship or whatever that thing is, can be meaningful and appreciated for what it was and when it was, and recognizing that you're in a different space now. So with that, I think we will wrap up this after show. It's probably going to be a massive episode, but with someone who has as much wisdom as Matthew Fredericks, I would expect nothing less. We used to have hour-long discussions in the library about history and politics and philosophy and everything in between. So it's great to get to relive that with Matthew Fredericks.
It's amazing. And one thing to note as well, so we will be on a break until January 3rd.
We were on a break.
We're on a break. Is that a reference to something?
It's
I don't even
Friends.
know what that is.
It's Friends.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
It's
Friends.
Ross and Rachel.
We all know now.
Yep.
No, I'm just kidding. But we're playing with the idea of maybe doing a little bonus episode that would come out on the 27th. That would just be me and Blake discussing things. So just keep an eye out. But for now, we're going to be holding off, and we'll come back in 2017 strong and ready and excited. Woohoo!
Great year ahead. All right, peace and love, fam. We'll catch you soon. For show notes and upcoming guests, or to learn more about Coactive Coaching, the blog, and our other awesome offerings, visit motivationalmillennial.com. Keep in touch with us at facebook.com/motivationalmillennial.
We'd love to hear from you. Shoot us an email with your thoughts, comments, and suggestions at podcast@motivationalmillennial.com. And tell us who you might like to hear from, or if you think you or anyone you know would be good for the show.
The Motivational Millennial podcast is edited by Christy Hostler and Team Podcast.
Our theme music was composed and performed by Blake Brandis. Have a great week, Motivational Millennials!